Yeah, this one's a long one. Pretty much sums up all my talks. Yeah. This one's a long one. The best was when teaching high school because the bell would ring, you know. Here would be the meditation chime. Ching. That's how you could keep me on track. All right. Morning, everybody. It's good to see you on this cold day. I wanted to begin with a Mary Oliver poem just to hear her words because she passed away this week, if you did not hear the news. If it wasn't on your Facebook feed, you're following the wrong people. So, yeah, I mean, there are a few poets, and she's at the top, who have gotten under my own skin and are deeper than I know, and her lines especially, just come to me from time to time. And I only know a few of her poems. I was looking at her books on my shelf and just thinking, wow, what a legacy, what a living body of work that will remain alive whenever you turn to it, whenever you open those pages. What an amazing gift, really, to bring yourself into the world. And this poem, in a sense, is about voice and about finding your voice in a way. I know that's a bit of a cliche term these days, find your voice, but it's a very rich and ancient notion. What is yours to bring in the world? Actually, it's even in the word vocation, which has vox in it, which means voice. What is yours to bring forth? And this poem, it cut me to shreds at just the right time in my life. One day you finally knew what you had to do. And you began. That's the kicker. You know, one day you finally knew what you had to do, and you congratulated yourself. You know, no, you began and you started. And for me, it was already a wild night. It was already late and a wild night, and there were broken branches on the road and stones, and slowly and barely, something like a voice, my own voice, began to burn through the sheets of cloud. So I don't know, and I'm still in that. I'm still beginning. But there's something I think that is in this poem that is culturally poignant, maybe is the right word. I came in here this morning and I was looking at all these hundreds of pieces of artwork by kids. And I thought of Mary Oliver's poem, which is, I hope that something of their voice, their deeper voice, will come through during the course of their life. It's not guaranteed. That's what's sort of troubling about this poem. One day you finally knew what you had to do and you changed your mind. Or one day you finally knew what you had to do and you shoved it down. Or one day you finally knew what you had to do and you went la, 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 la. Whatever. Or one day you finally knew what you had to do and life's circumstances were so difficult and so overwhelming. Didn't feel like you had the courage to put one foot in front of the other. It's not guaranteed. I see all kinds of potential on those little paintings and pieces of artwork out there. And like the song says, we live in a troubled world right now. So that's what I want to talk a bit about today, voice. And I think it's related to the season we're in. Because to come back to Tara, and at least in this sense, here we are in the winter season. And it's not a metaphor, if you didn't notice. My fancy car said it was -1 on the way in. I thought, that's pretty cold. I'm glad I don't have to walk here. What a strange world we live in. And the winter season is the season of going underground, of things going dormant and quiet into the underworld where the seeds prepare to germinate. In other words, the life cycle of all things. Here we are again. into the underworld? What wants to be born in the world? What wants to burn through the sheets of clouds, you might ask? What voice or voices want to be heard, are being called forth to be heard in the world, is one of the questions of the winter wonderland we're in right now. And we feel it, we feel the going inwards just as much as we feel the pull to go indoors. Some of you talk about, I had a lot of courage that I went outside in the winter. I agree. It takes a lot of courage because there's something about that natural closing in, that natural hibernation that is psychological and physical sort of at the same time. So, what wants to be born in the world? And another way of speaking of this voice that I think Mary Oliver is at least hinting at, I would call the soul. There is a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own. I love that line. You slowly recognize it as your own. You don't know what it is until you put it forth in the world. And you slowly recognize it and you say, oh, who was it that just spoke or acted or did something in the world? I barely recognize it. It's not the kind of thing that you can take a test for and say, there it is. You know, I answered these 20 questions and I've found my voice, I found my soul. It's something you begin to recognize as you bring forth this way of being in the world. And perhaps it only comes slowly. And the soul, on the one hand, is a phrase like soul is being overused and underused sort of at the same time. It's sort of being used in a cliche sense, the soul, and also we're not really talking about that much of the time. It's almost a forgotten way of speaking about what it means to be human. And here's a genuine question. What is the aim, purpose, meaning, thread of your life, of anyone's life? What is it? And how do we come to know it? So those are the questions that I'm sort of interested in personally, and also not so personally. Culture. I think about these paintings outside, all these little pieces of artwork, and I wonder to myself, every single kid out there, what is the thread? What is the aim? What is the purpose? Don't you want for them, like we started, the something of the gold to shine through? Don't you? I do. To be recovered and discovered and put forth in the world, but it's not a guarantee. You can't be naive about that. And also, in case you're getting worried that human nature is all just gold and flowers and fluff, it's not. The thread of your life is complex. And there is darkness, and there are wounds, and there is gold, and there is light, and there's a bit of star in each of us. I don't mean star in any way to be like Dancing with the Stars. Famous. That's not what I mean. I mean something beautiful shining forth. What the Greeks called genius. And we tend to think about geniuses as being really smart people. The genius was that thread, that aim. Your own wild, unique way of being in the world. William Stafford called it your own way of seeing things. Your own way of seeing things. You have to discover it. There it is. And it's worth the pursuit. And that's what I want for myself, for you, for all those kids out there who begin to, just paint and draw and make collages and a bit of the thread coming forth, just a bit. So winter, I think, is the time where it draws our attention to these kinds of questions, at least in my opinion, where we sink back to the source of everything, as that great line from Rilke says. So I have two stories in mind. I'm going to share them briefly. And one story requires a little bit of backdrop, and here we'll go to the Greeks. So the Greeks are the ones who gave us the word fate. Okay, the word fate. And fate, actually, in Greek mythology, were three goddesses. The three goddesses of fate. And one goddess, this is so good, I get so excited about this. One goddess wove together the cloth of your particular life. Just imagine that in your mind. Use your wild imagination. There's the goddess. Just picking up the pieces. And let's make it contemporary. What goes in the cloth? Well, your DNA, your makeup, your eye color, your skin color, where you're born in the world, all the crap that you inherited from your parents, all of the stories that preceded you coming into this world, that's in the cloth. Nobody consulted you. Hey, what would you like? Of the menu, the McDonald's menu of things you'd like. No, the goddess just said, here it is. Starts gathering up this cloth. The other goddess, her sister, pulls it out like a thread. Just starts pulling that cloth out. So not only are you a collection of things, you have some kind of aim or purpose that's being pulled out like this. And part of the genius, by the way, this mysterious notion, is to follow the thread and aim of this particular thread that the goddess of fate stretched out before you. Okay? And the best sister of all is the one with the scissors. And she comes along and snips off the end. Nobody consulted you in any of this snipping, but it happens. It happens like you cut the umbilical cord from a baby. That's where the image is rooted. I made that up. I think that's probably the case. Cut off from the mother, and one day, cut off from what you've called your life. We should be talking more about fate. Because here it is. Here's your life. Here's the life of your kids and your grandkids. There it is, strung out on a thread. We don't exactly know when this terrible sister is going to come along and say, and what happens in between? Well, we hope something of your aim, your purpose, your genius, like a star, you'll live into before it's too late. That's the terror of being alive in sort of mythic form. I'm using mythic language here. Hopefully something of your voice will burn through the sheets of clouds before the sister has her way with her scissors. It's like a calling. It's troubling. And in my mind, it's also wildly encouraging. So that's a little bit of background. So here's the story. That wasn't even the story. Those were just the three sisters. So I'll tell you in a very brief version of it. Check Michael Meade if you want the full story in a book called The Genius Myth. So he says, in the womb, which is a lot like the tomb, but in the tomb womb darkness, a little light comes on. A little angel comes in and lights the light of your own soul. And just for a second, you get a glimpse in the womb, even the baby gets a glimpse of the thread, the aim, the purpose. There it is, just a glimpse. And right before birth, another little angel comes along cleverly and blows the light out. So you come into the world, here's the mythic idea, you come in the world with a kind of memory for aim, purpose, meaning, your voice, in other words, but you forget it. You forget it. The angel says, not so fast. You got to work. I wish it was that easy. Wouldn't it be great to have an owner's manual, It's like, wait a minute. Sometimes, this is so ridiculous that I don't even know why I tell you this, but sometimes I think about all we know about the life of Jesus is from the Gospels, and I imagine, what if he had the Gospels? He's like, what should I do next? Okay, Sermon on the Mount. And away he goes. That would be so much easier. But we don't get that because the angel came along and cleverly blew the light out. So we just have to discover it. Discover it, recover it. I don't know which. So it's troubling to be a human being. And this story, I think, hints around at such a thing. And what is it that we hope we discover? The genius, the aim, the purpose, the meaning. Like Michelangelo famously saying, I just free the image from the stone. That's what we hope for our own lives. The stone, the encasement of our life, our culture, our society, our hang-ups, all of that, all the stuff that's encasing is something of that. The flakes and rocky bits fall away enough where something of the golden aim shines through. You say, there it is. And you can tell when you go to someone's funeral who's a bit of their genius has come through in their life. Can't you? You can tell. I'm not going to say the alternative. You might, well, I will. You can also tell when it's not there. Am I right? Yeah. There's a loss. It doesn't always happen. So, next story. That's story number one. Next story I think is, to me, very interesting. I was just in Israel, and I was at a place called the Herodian. The Herodian was named after, wild guess, Herod. So he named it after himself, which is always a good idea. Imagine someone who would name large structures after himself. I'm sorry. It's like too easy. It's too easy. I'm not even good at it. I mean, it's like if you were a talk show host right now, it's just like you have the easiest job in the world. Anyway, the Herodian sits outside of Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is the place, according to the Gospels, where Jesus is born. So you have the place of a king, which is a large artificial structure. Herod actually moved part of a mountain to create this galus, this large structure. It looks like a volcano. It's man-made. And he moved it there, and it sort of overlooks the city of Bethlehem, which is an interesting move in and of itself. And the story of Jesus takes place in Bethlehem, according to the Gospel of Matthew. And there are two separate narratives in the Gospels. One is in Luke and one is in Matthew. The Matthew one is what I'm interested in right now. The Matthew one is the one where the Magi come. In other words, the magicians, the star readers, the people from the east who come mysteriously in. By the way, they bring 3 gifts, but we always just imagine there are 3 of them. It doesn't really mention how many they are. They're just these Magi people. They come from the mysterious east, and they come to Herod, and they say, hey, we've been reading the stars, very common thing, and we're taking it to mean that a new king is going to be born into the world. So where is he? And Herod says, I don't know. He's the king, of course. Herod says, I don't know. Why don't you go find out so that I can also go and worship this king? Because Herod was such a great guy, and he was just willing to give up his power. So they go and they find the baby, and they present these gifts. And the gifts I want to come to in a second, but they're gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they're warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. They go back home. They leave. Seems like a long journey. It's like, here's some stuff. We're out of here. The Magi go back home, and Herod then gets all worked up and tries to kill the babies in Bethlehem. And then Jesus' parents flee to Egypt, which is an interesting sort of image in and of itself. They flee to the place where the Jewish people were once enslaved. They leave the territory of Herod, they cross a border, and they go into the Roman Empire. That was who was ruling Alexandria in the area of Egypt at that time. And they're welcomed, in a sense, as political refugees from one place to another, where they're allowed to live for a while until it's safe enough to go back home. Imagine a world where such a thing is possible. And so I'm back to these gifts. So I was thinking to myself, what is with these gifts? Like, if I just take it as a historian, what does a kid, or if I just take it as factual, what is a kid who's basically a day laborer going to do with gold, frankincense, and myrrh? You know what? So, well, I mean, I suppose you could say, well, he could pocket some of that gold, and build up his 401k, whatever. I don't know. You knew I was going to say that. I don't know. What do you do with that? Or frankincense? Just a lot of frankincense. Just gotta have the frankincense. You know how it is. Myrrh. Like, what are these things? So from a mythopoetic point of view, you have to ask, what do they represent? What do they represent? What do these magicians, these star readers, see in the story? Or see in this baby that the baby cannot see and neither do his parents? That's more of an interesting question to me. What do they represent? And to me, what they represent, first of all, with the gold, is a bit of what I'm talking about. They see in this birth a kind of kingship. That's what the gold represents from a historical point of view. It's what kings wear, which is kind of a big vision. If somebody came to you, just after, you had your first kid and whatever, some weirdo showed up and said, we've been reading the stars and we think your kid's going to be the president. You'd be like, police, could you escort these people somewhere else? It's a weird thing. But anyway, they take it. They show up, they take and the gold, I think, at least in my mind, seems to represent this aim. And I mean this seriously. What if they could see, or what if the story teaches us that this child or any child has a certain golden aim, has a kind of kingship, metaphorically, or king or queenship, metaphorically, that is the aim of their life. It's like the angel lighting the candle for a moment and getting a glimpse of where the story might be going. Only 1 second later to have that light blown out by Herod and fleeing straight to Egypt. Let me put it more directly. If something of, let's take Jesus as an example, of his aim, his life, his purpose, his genius is glimpsed at the beginning, it's not necessarily lived into. It's just glimpsed for a moment. It's like the magicians that say, what could this life be? What could it be? Do you know how easy your life is cut off before you reach such a thing? Especially in the ancient world? Am I right? Yeah. So just something of what kind of purpose will you live into? Let's find out. And they go back home. The myrrh is a little darker. I don't know, I haven't thought much about the frankincense yet. The myrrh is used, well, frankincense is too, in embalming. It's something for death. Again, thanks for the gift. It's like you have a baby, you're sitting there, some weirdos come in and say, hey, we think your kid's going to be the president, and we've also provided a coffin for you. They're going to die. Like, what? Those are what these symbols, I think, seem to represent. It's the three sisters of fate. Here you are, here's the thread, and here are the scissors. This king's lifespan, I'm not saying that they knew everything, I'm just saying symbolically. What will you do between now, the moment of birth, and the moment of death to fulfill your aim, your genius, your meaning, your purpose, your golden thread? What will you do to find it? It's sort of a question that just gets posed, which to me, I think, is as relevant as ever. I think perhaps something like a star or a light appears at the birth of anyone, every child. And that's what I like about the Jesus story, because there's no reason. He's just a poor kid, really. I mean, Mary and Joseph are just apparently teenagers, you know? There's no preconceived path for them of greatness. It's just a couple of kids. Isn't that the birth of everybody? Just a couple of kids who have kids, and they're like, oh crap, I haven't even grown up and I have kids, you know? And what's in that? A seed of possibility. That thread, something of a thread appears. Have you ever heard this line in the Bible? It says, train up a child in the way she should go, or he should go, and they will not depart from it when they're old. You ever heard that line? It actually says in Hebrew, train up a child in the way she is bent. That's what it literally means. Isn't that a weird thing? Until you've had kids, it's not so weird. Your kid is bent in a certain way. Am I right? Yeah. So what's our job as parents? I think in a sense, to be as sensitive as we can to that bent. Where might it be going? Well, that thread might be going in a direction that nobody consulted you on. Tough. I wanted them to be X. I'm not saying you can't have, maybe that's a great thing. I want you to be X. And the kid says no. Okay, fine. Big deal. But my point was, how is the child bent? Or every one of those kids out there that made those collages and paintings. That's the beginning. Just to look at them and say, how is this kid beginning to see the world? It is wildly and wildly and imaginatively unique. It is. And you have to have a nose for it. I'm not saying I have a great nose for it, but I'm saying that's part of the call, to be sensitive to this training up. And these are questions I don't have answers to. How will we help others see this thread, this greatness, and a bit of their darkness too? It's part of what's woven into the cloth. I don't know. So here's what I want us to sort of walk away with. Just a kind of imagination. When you leave this place and you walk out there, well, first of all, let me say some obvious things to refer to your song again. We live in troubled times, dark times. Life is hard. There are things going on in our culture that are immoral and evil and hard. There's suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. There's always suffering, but there's a lot of unnecessary suffering going on. When you go out in the hallway, look at the sea of possibilities in all those paintings. And imagine that each one of those kids has something like a star. A star appears in the east like the Magi and shines down on their life there at the beginning. There's a sea. There it is out there. And ask yourself, and I'm asking myself, what kind of person do I want to be in the world? How might I work, not only for me to recover more of my own voice, but for the world to be such that those kids will discover what is theirs to do in the world. And it's going to be trial and error. I realize that. You don't say, there it is, and hand it to them. It has to be discovered. One day you finally knew what you had to do and begin. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, is how Mary Oliver begins her poem. But what kind of imagination do you have for your kids and your grandkids in your community, in this community, and generations that we can't see? I mean, I doubt in 4 generations, what would that be, great, I guess I can count to 4 kids. They won't even know my name, most likely. Okay, so what kind of world am I leaving now that has in mind at least a bit of the seeds of possibility for the future? Those are the questions that I'm carrying with me today. So one day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. So may this week you find another new way of beginning. Thanks for listening.